courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast. This is episode 477. I am Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on Twitter. Joining me as always, my co-host Derek, DV3 in our forum, and DV3G and DV384 on Twitter. Derek, we have an epic game to recap for our listeners this week.
So this was only the second time that Andrew had ever played NBA Inside Drive 2003. And the way we connected was obviously once again through Parsec, which worked amazing as usual, and also in combination with the Xenia emulator, so the Xbox emulator. And we took the court with the Toronto Raptors on the same team against the CPU 76ers. And we're going to get into details about how the game went. But first, Andrew, I wanted to lay the groundwork for this not so epic matchup in real life.
That's
it was
right.
Epic when we connected on Inside Drive 2003, but it wouldn't be an epic matchup in real life.
No, not at all. Not at all. Those teams had some interesting players, but not at the top of the standings.
So the rosters are based off of the beginning of the 02-03 season. In both NBA Live 2003 and NBA Inside Drive 2003, Hakeem Olajuwon is still on the Raptors. He was a late scratch for the season. He decided to retire right before the season started. So the games were already made, the rosters were already out and whatnot. So yeah, we got the privilege of using Hakeem Olajuwon in a season that he never played in. And this Raptors team, without Olajuwon, went 24-58. They were 7th in the Central Division. Get this, Andrew. Listen to how different this is compared to today. They averaged 90.9 points per game, which was 27th in the league. And this was their roster. They had Morris Peterson, Antonio Davis, Vince Carter. Vince Carter led their team in scoring with 20.6 points per game. Alvin Williams, Jerome Williams, all of these guys we used when we used the Raptors in the game. Vashawn Leonard, Lindsey Hunter, I believe Rafer Alston was an acquisition later in the season. They had Michael Bradley, Nate Huffman, basketball legend Nate Huffman, etc. And the 76ers went 48-34, which was second in the Atlantic Division. They averaged 96.8 points per game and held their opponents to 94.5. They won their first round series against New Orleans 4-2, and they lost in the Eastern Conference semis to the Pistons in 6 games. So they did have some success this year, Andrew. And this was their team. They had Allen Iverson, Eric Snow, Keith Van Horn. Keith Van Horn actually did a lot of damage to us, especially in the first half. Kenny Thomas, Aaron McKee, Derek Coleman, Todd McCulloch, John Sammons, Mark Bryant, etc. So those are just some of the main names. The guys that did the most damage to us were Eric Snow, Keith Van Horn, and Allen Iverson. But those two teams weren't incredibly strong. However, I will say that Sixers team does have some pieces.
It does, and of course you have the real T-Mac. He threw down some big dunks on us, actually, inside. Trying to stop him with old Hakeem was a bit more difficult than it perhaps should have been, but nevertheless, that did make the game even more epic. Of course, Vince Carter only played 43 games that year. That was the year that he spent, he missed most of the first half of the season. That was the controversy, as you recall, around the 2003 All-Star game. People feeling he should step aside for MJ to start, and eventually he did at the very last minute in that game. But yes, that certainly set them back that year, and even though Hakeem wasn't there in real life, as you said, a late scratch, deciding to retire despite being under contract for one more year, it was nice to have him in the game. It was fun to still have him on that team, even though it was inaccurate.
Yeah, he was helpful for us. I mean, he had a couple hook shots, and he was cleaning up on the offensive glass and throwing it down, and he had some decent defensive rebounds where he threw an outlet immediately when we were able to get out on the break. I think that what needs to be said even before we get into, the game details and whatnot and what transpired is just how great of a game NBA Inside Drive 2003 is. I mean, it's only the second time that Andrew's ever played it, and he will tell you that it is one of the most epic games he's ever been a part of on the virtual hardwood. And, I was sending him highlights after the game of, me flying in with Antonio Davis and getting a tip dunk off of an Akeem miss, Alvin Williams shooting a layup where he adjusts it in the air and finishes it on the opposite side of the hoop, Vince Carter going under the legs on a dunk, Iverson doing a pump fake and then doing a little fadeaway, which he would really do in like 15 feet away from the basket. And it's just the attention to detail and the variety in the animations and all the different things that you can do in that game. It is a shocker for a game, like I stated, that, that came out in the early 2000s. And we were just so impressed by it.
I mean, we talked about Inside Drive 2004 last week. I commented how impressed I was with that game, how I thought it held its own against the very impressive Live 2004 and ESPN NBA Basketball, the 2K game that year, of course. But, this is right up there with Live 2003 and NBA 2K3 as well. In fact, as far as pace goes, it's a more sim game than Live 2003, which, as we've noted before, and as many people do know, leaned in that arcade direction. It doesn't have the dribbling controls of Live 2003, which, of course, introduced freestyle control that year, so it doesn't have that going for it. But, man, yeah, that is a fantastic game. And, you asked me last week would I spend time with Inside Drive 2004 over Live 2004, and I said I might gravitate back towards 2004 because of Dynasty Mode. But with the gameplay of 2003, I might have made the switch that year. If I had an Xbox, Derek, I might have ended up playing Inside Drive 2003 more. I might have gravitated towards other games earlier than I did, possibly.
Yeah, and Inside Drive 2003 has excellent stat tracking. And it actually seems to have a better sim engine than Inside Drive 2004 as well. One thing that I've always said is a mark of a great video game is, it, like, as far as like in between the lines action, is a game that can produce fun offense and fun defense, like that have good offensive mechanics and good defensive mechanics. And how good are the poke steals and blocks in Inside Drive 2003? You had a block with Akeem where they tried to put up a floater around the rim and you suspended the shot in the air at the height of the ball. And it looked absolutely amazing. And obviously Kevin Calabro's commentary, I think he said like upgraded or denunciated or something like that. He has great commentary around each on-court happening. But I love the steal mechanics in that game and the block mechanics. It just feels very rewarding.
Compared to an NBA Live 2003, where you have those big booming blocks that everybody, even like a Darrell Armstrong, will block a shot and it's flying but to the opposite baseline. It's kind of fun, don't get me wrong, but it's definitely not sim. And sometimes you do want those softer blocks that you can control, that you can keep in bounds and start a fast break with. That block I had with Akeem didn't. That did go out of bounds. It was very satisfying to have that kind of swat, get that out of here. But we had some other blocks, Derek, those softer blocks that you have in other games. Live 2001 is another game that has some really nice soft blocks that can start a fast break by collecting that loose ball and then throwing that outlet pass. And we had a couple of blocks with Hakeem and I think Antonio Davis that just jump-started those breaks that was so satisfying. And you're right, having that two-way play is crucial in any game that's worth its salt. Any basketball game that's worth its salt will have a great two-way game that is fun to play at both ends of the floor. And a lot of games get offense right, but defense is always... if there's a problem in games, it's usually with the defense.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say this, too, and my brother feels the same way. The fast breaks and the fast break logic overall in Inside Drive 2003 and Inside Drive 2004, we find it better than Live in 2K at the time. Just the way the players always keep moving, the animations when they catch the ball, they're not being sucked into any two-man animations or any ridiculous animations and whatnot. I just love fast breaking. And we had a play where I think it was Alvin Williams got a poke steal. So he jarred the ball and he threw it up to Vince Carter, and Vince Carter obviously continued to head towards the hoop. The ball followed him and he caught it, and then he went under his leg and finished with a one-handed jam. And I couldn't have asked for it to look any better. Like, it looked great and it felt great.
And the other one you pointed out to me was that Mo Pete dunk where he caught it on the break and took that dribble before taking off.
Yeah, that power dribbled. How good did that look?
Yeah, I mean, in so many games, In that situation, the dribble animation will be interrupted to go into the dunk animation, often a rocket dunk animation. But that felt really natural, felt and looked really natural. That was very impressive.
Yeah, I just get floored every time I play that game, and I can't even imagine what those games would look like today. And that's kind of what inspired me to ask this week's mailbag question related to, what past 5-on-5 NBA titles would you like to see come back? And I asked the audience if they could only choose one, which one would it be? And I gave examples, Inside Drive, NBA Shootout, NBA in the Zone, etc. And yeah, I think that Inside Drive would be unbelievable today, just like it was back then. And I'd also love to see NBA Shootout because, it was NBA Shootout. Then it went to the NBA 06, 07, 08. 09, and it had the life mode and all of that stuff. And the people that work on that game, San Diego Studios, they're the ones who make the amazing MLB The Show series. So they're doing such a great job with that baseball series. It'd be cool to see them make, a basketball game today.
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about that before. We will get to that mailbag question later in the show. Obviously, we will say that we did exclude NBA Live from that question. Not because we don't want to see NBA Live come back, of course. We've talked about that so many times, Derek, how we want to see Live come back. It's just that we have seen that within the past decade, whereas we haven't seen these other series in more than a decade. So we wanted to focus on that. Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community. Let's talk about this epic game, Derek. But before we get to that, we should note that it could have gone a very different way, because we started a game with the Raptors and 76ers. We're taking control of the Raptors, as we said, and we had it on a lower difficulty. Sometimes we have that just for fun, and also because I've got a bit of lag because of where I live in the world, Australia, obviously. Sometimes having it on an intermediate difficulty level makes it a bit easier for jump shot timing and things like that. But it was too easy. It was too easy, so we cranked up the difficulty, and that was such the right call.
So there's 3 difficulty levels in that game, and the medium difficulty level is veteran, and that's what we started on. So that first game we played on veteran. I think we went up like 12-2 immediately to start that game, and I didn't even say to Andrew that I was going to quit. I just paused the game and quit it.
I got it,
and I messaged Twitter. He knew why I was doing it. I said, we got to put this on the hardest level because we want this game to be epic. So I changed it to All-Star, which is the hardest level in the game. And as Andrew experienced, on All-Star, the computer does not miss that often. I think that in the first quarter, they probably shot close to 70% from the floor until we, adjusted our defense and started getting better at contesting shots and whatnot. So another thing that was great about this game that Andrew and I had is that we were playing it on the hardest difficulty level. Like, it can't get any harder than what we experienced. And we started out in the first quarter just kind of like trading baskets and whatnot. I think they ended up going up, though, I want to say 18-11 or 20-11 or something like that. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, we still got this, right? Like, I didn't feel like we were getting completely dominated. I felt like we had made some mistakes early on, some errant passes. Maybe we weren't taking the best shots and everything. So then we ended up pulling it closer. I think it was 25-20. And we were really getting it going with Vince. And I want to say that started mostly at the beginning of the second quarter when we were really getting into it with Vince Carter. Antonio Davis was cleaning up everything around the rim. He was throwing it down. Andrew and I were making it a point when we grabbed a rebound to get it out on the break as fast as we could. So we were hitting Mo Pete and Vince Carter and Alvin Williams and Antonio Davis and whatnot. We were hitting all of these guys in motion, in transition, and we were trying to put pressure on the computer. And I felt like in the first half, specifically the second quarter, we were playing pretty good basketball, especially considering that was only your second time with this video game. But yeah, Iverson, Van Horn, and Eric Snow were not easy to stop, Andrew.
No, they were killing us. Even Derek Coleman stepped back and hit a three, which he could do. So they were just hitting us with absolutely everything in that game, and they started to pull away.
They did, and specifically in the third quarter. So in the third quarter, it was an absolute onslaught by the CPU. And one thing about this game is when you make a turnover, they make you pay. And Andrew and I had thrown a few bad passes in the third quarter in the half court that went right to the CPU, which allowed them to get out on the break. And they're not just going to mindlessly attack the hoop when they get a steal in that game. And they're not going to just like charge the hoop and, take a layup that's going to get blocked and whatnot or heavily contested. They're going to stop behind the 3-point line and hit a three if it's there. And there were a couple times where we would make a turnover and they would immediately make us pay on the other end with a three. And I remember, I want to say Iverson hit one like that. Van Horn hit one from the top corner, etc. And it was devastating. I want to say that during that, like a 2 or 3 minute stretch in the third quarter, we went from being down, I want to say 8 or 10 to 20. And it was just like in the blink of an eye. And at that point, I'm like, oh crap. We have a huge hole to dig out of. We're playing it on the hardest level. We're playing 6-minute quarters, so we don't have that much time. And I, like you stated when we were talking on Twitter, you're like, we're just gonna have to make it respectable, right? Yeah. Like we're gonna do everything we possibly can to make it respectable.
Get some highlights, just kind of try and turn it around and have some fun with it. And yes, if we can make it respectable, because they just ran it out. I think they're up 18 by the end of the third. Greg Buckner hit a three, just ran up into three of all players, just that was a dagger at the end of the third. That and at the beginning of the fourth, even the commentary, Kevin Clabber was like, "Oh, this game is over." He
said the pain and suffering is almost over.
Yeah,
is what Clabber said, because we were down at the start of the fourth quarter, 74-54, and then they smacked us with a three. So we were down 77-54 with like 5 minutes to go in the game. And that's a 23-point deficit against the computer on the hardest level. And I just remember thinking, we have to get out and run, and we have to get the ball to Vince. And we have to get the ball to Vince as much as possible. It doesn't matter if I'm using him. It doesn't matter if you're using him. And we need to attack. And I think what was beautiful about what we did with Vince Carter in the fourth quarter is that it wasn't all dunks, right? You know how you think about, oh, I'm going to stick it to the computer, or, oh, I'm in a tough position. I'm just going to run by the computer and I'm going to dunk, or I'm going to go full blown arcade because this game allows me to do it. And I'm just going to score over and over again by driving to the basket. You can't do that in inside drive. The defense is too good. So there is no exploits in that way. So with Vince Carter, Andrew hit like a 15-footer from the bottom of the screen. I hit like a fadeaway from the top of the screen. I drove hard right and hit a fadeaway. There was some layups in there. There were some dunks in there. There was a three in there where you handed it off to me and I hit a three, and then there was also a deep two. The onslaught by Vince Carter in that fourth quarter was so satisfying because of the variety of the way he was scoring.
And of course, we did miss a couple of shots, so we crashed the offensive boards and put it up, and I got those second chance buckets and everything. So we were just doing everything. We were getting out and running. We were aggressive. Well, I'd say we were more assertive, Derek, because we were playing under control. We were pushing, but we weren't going crazy with it. We weren't trying to force the issue, as you said, not trying to get in there and dunk every time. If we had that open lane at the bucket, We were absolutely doing that. We were getting the easy buckets whenever we could, of course, but we were mixing it up. We were taking good shots. The jump shot timing in that game is quite good. I think it might even be better than Live 2003 because I was hitting shots even with my input lag, again, living in Australia as I do. But those jump shots were viable. You were knocking them down as well, scoring all over the court with Vince Carter, just making this run. And they were up 83-68 with about 2 minutes, a little over 2 minutes left. And from there, we scored 17 unanswered to win at 85-83. And on the highest difficulty level, with 2 minutes left, once we were under 10, once we got the deficit under 10, Derek, with about 2 minutes left, I felt it was viable. Once we got it down to 5, I felt really good. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to jinx it. You know how superstitious us sports fans and sports gamers get. But what an effort. I'm so proud, quite frankly, of that effort because we could have just given up. But, you know, how rewarding was that to get that win?
It was. And I was always scared. Like in the fourth quarter, I was still scared because that team does have quite a few weapons. Like I told you, they did make, you know, the second round of the playoffs and lose to the Pistons in 6. You know, Van Horn is a sniper in that game. Eric Snow is a little bit too effective offensively because I know he hit a 3 or 2 against us as well. And Iverson is always deadly. And they still have Derek Coleman, who video games, you know, still at the time were making him a little bit too fast. You know what I mean? A little bit too...
bit too 90s Derek Coleman, yeah.
Early 90s Derek Coleman. So he's always tough to stop. And McCulloch had a couple big dunks around the rim on us because you can't get lazy. If you're not covering the paint in that game, they will send a cutter to the hoop. They will find him, and he will throw it down, which happened with the legend Sam Clancy once. It happened with McCulloch a couple times. Van Horn had a couple cuts where he did a finger roll up over the rim, etc. So you can't fall asleep in that game. In the fourth quarter, so in that game, actually, we had 15 turnovers as a team, which is a lot for 6-minute quarters. But in the fourth quarter, we only had 1 turnover. And that was huge because, like you said, what we did is we decided to start, you know, we were really going to play smart. And it was about getting it to Vince Carter. It was about making the right pass. It was about not forcing post-entry passes, which caused turnovers earlier in the game and whatnot. And it was just applying consistent pressure to the CPU. So like you said, we went on a 17-0 run. And I remember us cutting the lead to 3. It was 83-80. And I drove hard right and I did a fadeaway with Vince Carter and I missed it. And I'm like, I hope I didn't just lose us the game because I think there was like maybe 40 seconds left.
Yep.
When I did that. And they went down the other end and we just relentlessly were contesting shots at the hoop. And I think they had 3 looks at the hoop and all 3 missed because we were just relentlessly contesting. So we go down the other end and my thought is there's only 15 to 20 seconds left. We need a 3. We got to tie this game. And I get the ball to you down low. And I move to the 3-point line with Vince Carter. You hand it off to me. I shoot it. Perfect release timing. The shot goes in, and it's a 2.
Foot in the line, yeah.
My heart sunk. I'm like, damn. Because
I thought it was a 3 too. It looked like a 3 to me, yeah.
It looked like a 3 when I first shot it. Oh, by the way, this video for our listeners, it's up on YouTube, so you can watch the highlights of the game that we're talking about. The full game highlights are on there. It's a 12-minute video. It's definitely worth the watch. So there's a little over 10 seconds left, and I'm thinking, well, we're going to have to foul, and we're going to have to hope that they miss one, or even if they hit both, we're going to have to head down the other end real quick and hit a 3. But before the intentional foul happened, I was like, I'm going to pound the steal button here, and I'm going to try to get a poke steal. And if we can get a poke steal instead and get a basket, then all is right with the world. And I stripped it once. They got the ball back, and then I stripped it again. And I want to say the strip was with Vince Carter, and then Alvin Williams picked it up. And Alvin Williams attacks the rim. He gets fouled from behind. The finger roll goes in, and we go up by 1. And I look at my Twitter notifications, and it's you with a big Marv Albert, yes.
Yep.
Right when it happened, because I don't think either of us thought we were, had a great chance to win this game.
Yeah, that was less than 50-50 at that point, it felt, but what a steal. Alvin Williams, hero of the game.
Hero of the game. So I think it was 84-83, and I'm at the line, and I'm like, I need to put us with, ahead by one possession. And the free throws are so hard in that game. They're brutal on the hardest level. My brother and I do not shoot a good percentage normally, but I nailed that free throw with Alvin Williams. It put us up 2, so 85-83. And there's like 7 or 8 seconds left. They get the ball to Iverson. I'm right in his face, but he takes a 30-footer. And you know how video games are.
Yeah.
Like on certain video games, like on NBA Showtime, NBA on NBC, some of the other past basketball games, like that shot has a great chance of going in.
That's a CPU middle finger. That's a classic CPU middle finger.
Right, yeah. And I was like, Iverson's going to hit this damn thing.
Yeah,
and
thinking that too.
He missed it, and we won. And I just I can't even believe that we came back from 23 down in the fourth quarter to win a game against the CPU on the hardest level.
It was amazing. It's easily one of my favorite games that we've played together, or all time for that matter. Overcoming that deficit on the hardest difficulty level when the CPU is prone to saying, okay, you know what, I've given you a chance, now I'm just going to rubber band this and just be absolutely ruthless. Because it was quite ruthless throughout the game. And the shots that it was missing, it was, you might think that's unrealistic, but I do actually have some historical comparisons that we'll get into shortly. But yeah, what an amazing finish of that game. The free throw system, I did want to comment. I meant to mention that last week, actually, when we talked about Inside Drive 2004, because it's the same method. It's an interesting style, stopping it twice there along the bar. It does work, but I wouldn't say it's my preferred system. I mean, I couldn't use it. I couldn't make a single free throw with it. I missed rather badly when I had an opportunity to shoot with it. But I kind of prefer the team meter.
We usually miss badly. We do, my brother and I, and we played that game a ton. And it never gets easier. Like, it's just a really hard system. Obviously, the ball moves at a different speed depending on how bad the free throw shooter is. There's no real adjusting to it. I far prefer the team meter over the inside drive free throw mechanics. That's why I was surprised I hit that one with Alvin Williams. I'm like, no way I'm hitting this free throw. And I almost got it perfect. And it went in. But yeah, no, I think that's why we play, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's why basketball video games. That's why I laugh, when anybody looks down at people who get into these games and whatnot, because I was completely lost. Everything else in the world was tuned out. I was completely lost in that action.
Same.
Lost in the game. It was almost like when I play real basketball, right? When I'm playing real basketball, like I'm playing in a league right now, and I have a game tomorrow night, which is super exciting. But when I'm playing on the real hardwood, the only thing that matters in life, the only thing I'm thinking about is basketball. It's what's going on the court, right? It's my defensive assignment. It's, where I should be on the court. It's what I'm doing when I have the ball, all of that stuff. And it's beautiful. I absolutely love playing basketball, and that's one of the reasons. When I was playing that game with you, everything else was tuned out. It was like, I don't think about any issues in my life. I'm not thinking about, if I'm hungry, I'm not thinking about anything. I'm thinking about what's happening in that moment on the virtual hardwood. And I was just completely into that game and into that comeback. And for it to, come out positive on the other end and for us to have a positive result, that's what it's all about. That's awesome.
Absolutely. And look, that would have been a fun session. I would have enjoyed connecting with you and playing, even if we had lost. I mean, it would have been always would have been more satisfying to win, naturally, but it would still have been fun just to connect and play a game of virtual basketball. But getting the win like that just made my day, really. And like you say, some people do look down on that, but that's having a fun game with a friend, and on the other side of the world at that. So what's wrong with that?
Right. That wouldn't have been even close to as fun if I had that experience solo, right? Like if I was playing one player, like the fact that we were able to do that and share that moment together. It reminds me of, even though we were against each other on NBA Live 10, when I hit that Michael full court 3 that ended
Yeah.
up winning the game against you. Listen, if I had done that against the computer, I would have been like, oh, that was cool, right? But against you, sharing that experience with you, even though you were my opponent, and having you see that happen and experience it and everything, I'm sorry, but
Yeah.
that just made it that much more memorable and that much more fun.
You can see that clip. You shared that recently on Twitter. And look, as I said, I can't hate on that because even though I lost the game, what a way to lose, right? And just, of course, I see it happen that way and I'm like, oh, you're kidding me. But at the same time, yeah, it was just so spectacular. And it was special. It was absolutely special to see that happen because we do see these miraculous shots in real life. So when we see it happen in video games as well, it's also really cool. And to that point, video games replicating real life replicating video games. I did want to look up some stats to see how our comeback stacked up against reality. And now, Derek, I know you remember the VHS tape NBA Awesome Endings, released in 1989.
Oh, yeah. Nope, yeah, I've actually watched that a couple times.
And if people want to watch that, they can actually go to Santiago 73 or Santiago 73, their channel on YouTube. They've uploaded a lot of the home videos from the 80s and 90s. They've been up for years, haven't got a copyright strike, so that's pretty cool. I'm guessing the NBA just doesn't care about it. Maybe they should put that stuff on a streaming service with all kinds of on-demand historical content. Just saying. But in the meantime, you can go to that channel and check out a lot of great home videos from that era. But as the name implies, it is focusing on awesome endings in the NBA, these great buzzer beaters, great comebacks, and things like that. And the one that came immediately to mind for me, having watched that tape myself multiple times, is the Bucks versus Knicks game from this 1973 season. The Bucks were leading 86-68 with 5:50 remaining. Now, Derek, we were trailing 83-68 with about 2 minutes remaining. So if you adjust for 6-minute quarters, for 12-minute quarters, actually a very similar scenario.
No, that's awesome. Yeah. And that's one that I actually forgot about. I got to be honest with you. And yeah, that's actually Young Bucks Kareem, which is awesome. But yeah, I mean, the Knicks that year were so tough. That's the Knicks won the championship that year. And that's, Walt Frazier and Earl Monroe and Willis Reed and whatnot. So yeah, not surprising that the Knicks could make that comeback.
And it truly was an epic comeback to behold. Like I say, 86-68, very similar to our score, with not much time remaining. And the Bucks didn't score after that point. They just missed shot after shot, which, going back and watching that again, as I did to research this, reminded me a lot of our game, because the 76ers were just starting to miss shots as we defended well, and they threw up a couple of ill-advised ones, and we just crashed the boards as we did. And the Knicks ended up winning 87-86. Kareem missed a potential game winner, as AI did. It came to mind after our game, and going back and watching it, I was really tickled, Derek, by how close it was in statistically and so forth to our game.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter in our game, Iverson and Derek Coleman missed a couple of good looks at the rim that they would not normally miss. I think Iverson... actually, one was an outside shot with Iverson. One, he missed a layup in the fourth. I think Derek Coleman missed a 10-footer and maybe a 15-footer. So they were, while our defense did step up, we were doing a really good job contesting shots, but they did miss a few makeable shots that they made earlier in the game.
And get this, in the 1986 playoffs, 76ers versus Bullets in the first round. The 76ers were in control of Game 1 there. They were leading by 17 with just over 3 minutes left. 94-77 after Sedale Threet's free throw made it 94-77. But that was the last point the 76ers scored. The Bullets scored 18 straight to win it 95-94 on a last-second three by Dudley Bradley. 25% three-point shooter that year, 5.2 points per game career average. He was the 1981 All-Defensive Team selection, but not the player you want taking that game-winning shot, but made it. Again, a very similar situation years later.
You would want to choke me if we were playing like a retro season roster and I hit a game winner on you with Dudley Bradley.
Yeah, exactly.
My brother and I talk about this sometimes when we're watching old games. Like, you'll see players that you don't remember had certain parts of their game, and like you'll see them doing it in real life. But if I had done that with that player on the virtual hardwood, my brother would have been like yelling at me, like, well, what do you think he can do that? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, how dare you use him like that? And one of those situations actually was Blair Rasmussen. So we were playing, I want to say, what was it, a 92-93 matchup, and I was using the Hawks. And I hit a few mid-range shots with Blair Rasmussen, and my brother forgot that Rasmussen could do this in real life. And he was like, really, come on, like Blair Rasmussen shooting the ball from 15 to 18 feet.
Yeah, man.
So in order to remind him, I put on a game, a Hawks game from the early 90s. And Blair Rasmussen is out there in that game. I think he hit like 5 or 6 mid-range shots, between 15 and 18 feet from the basket. That's actually where he was best with that team. So sometimes you do need those kind of reminders. But I will say this about that 86 76ers team. One of my favorite ever. If it's the 85-86 76ers team, it not only has Barkley, Irving, and Moses Malone, but it also has Bob McAdoo on the bench. And they still have Bobby Jones and whatnot. It's just a great video game team, and they're pretty stacked from top to bottom.
Oh, for sure. And I'd like to throw out some other stats here. This year, in the 2023 playoffs, the Heat actually had the biggest fourth quarter comeback in a series-clinching game. They were down 16 to the Bucks before they came back and won that game. Of course, now they're in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Celtics in 2002, as you will remember, versus the Nets, and the Clippers in 2012 versus the Grizzlies both overcame 21-point fourth-quarter deficits to win playoff games. But the largest fourth-quarter deficit a team has ever overcome, it came in the regular season, 28 points, the Bucks over the Hawks in 1977. So there have been some really big comebacks in NBA history that, again, our game reflected. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me want to do stories and articles about these games that we have, right?
Yeah.
So we can preserve it, to go along with the videos that I post on YouTube. Heck, I like I've said on prior podcasts, I did that type of stuff when I was younger, when, on a typewriter, and, I'd have like a section on Tecmo Super NBA basketball, and it would be an epic game. And I would run upstairs to my typewriter and I would type up a fake article about the game. And I would, clip a, picture of one of the players that were in the game from one of my basketball magazines, and I would glue it to the piece of paper, and I'd be like, this is awesome. This is like a real article, right, about the game. So I still think about doing stuff like that sometimes, because that stuff has always kind of like stayed with me. In relation to the 2002 Boston Celtics comeback against the New Jersey Nets, obviously that was a huge deal in my house because we weren't missing a Celtics game at that time. Watch all 82 games during the regular season, watch every game in the playoffs and everything. And experiencing that as a huge Celtics fan and huge NBA fan was just enormous. It was so fun.
Oh, I can only imagine. Yeah, that 2002 Celtics team was special, making that run to the Eastern Conference Finals. And again, as we've said before, there was a lot of talk at the time. People wanted to see Lakers versus Celtics for the historical reasons alone.
Yeah, I think we could have given as good of a matchup as the Nets.
Yeah.
I really do. That Nets team overachieved. The fact that they were in the finals twice is very surprising to me. I do like some of their pieces. The Nets with, Jason Kidd, Kerry Kittles, and Kenyon Martin and whatnot. Like they were a good team, but I don't think that they should have been, finals bound 2 years in a row.
But yeah, that's the story of our epic game in NBA Inside Drive 2003. As I said about 2004 last week, would love to play more 2003. I'm definitely going to be up for that. And, we've talked about how it's unfortunate that the series stopped, and that relates into our mailbag question this week, of course. But I'll also say, Derek, that it's unfortunate that it didn't come out on PC as well. That we only got Inside Drive 2000 on PC, because the only competition was NBA Live on PC at that time. Really, Fox Sports NBA Basketball 2000 came out on PC as well, I suppose. But generally speaking, Live was the only game coming out on PC every year. So there was definitely room in that space to try and outmuscle Live on PC, just as 2K did on console, and then took over on PC as well when Live left. But it's a shame we didn't get it on PC. And again, it's Microsoft, so they could definitely do a Windows release. That's something they do.
I think you would have modded it.
Yeah.
I think you would have dabbled in it. I think the community would have tried to get their hands all over Inside Drive 2002, 2003, 2004 if they were released for the PC. It's decisions like that from companies that are strange to me. Like you said, they're Microsoft, right? And they had a prior PC release, NBA Inside Drive 2000. I wonder what their thought process was about, not bringing that game to PC, because it makes sense that they would have been on PC.
Maybe it was the reception for Inside Drive 2000 wasn't as positive. Maybe Live just was too well established, or maybe they just thought, basketball gaming, sports gaming belongs on console. A lot of people still think that stereotype still exists, despite the enthusiasm for the PC version in our community. A lot of people say, "Why are you playing it on PC? Why aren't you playing it on console?" I mean, that kind of stigma and tribalism does exist. So maybe they looked at the numbers and thought it wasn't worth it. But I wish they thought otherwise. If so.
Well, I believe I saw news, I wanted to bring this up, that Madden 24 is going to be next gen on PC. I think they're also making it cross-platform. And that brings hope to, for me, as far as 2K. Like, no, Madden isn't made by 2K Sports. They're made by EA Sports, a completely different company. But these companies watch what each other are doing, right? And it makes me hopeful that maybe NBA 2K24 for the PC will be next gen. And that would be really big for the community. They've been wanting that for a couple of years and whatnot. And I have my fingers crossed, because I think that the modders on the NLSC will go to town with it. And I think that it will just be a better experience for all on PC.
Well, WWE 2K23, which is Visual Concepts, that was a next-gen port or a new-gen port this year. So again, that's also a good sign.
So there you go. Exactly. And I think that maybe it's been enough years now where the people making these decisions believe that there's going to be more people that can play these games, right? Like maybe they do have newer computers. Maybe they can afford powerful enough computers that are going to be able to run these games and whatnot. So we'll see.
But yeah, a shame that we don't have the Inside Drive series and the NBA Live series and a bunch of other series apart from 2K. We're always talking about series we'd like to come back, including NBA Live, obviously. That was the question this week, of course. So, Derek, it is time to open up the mailbag.
To the mailman, the pump fake. What an unbelievable dunk!
So I asked the community, which 5-on-5 NBA basketball series would you like to see brought back? And I gave some examples, like I stated earlier on the show, like NBA In the Zone, NBA Inside Drive, the NBA Shootout series, NBA Starting Five, etc. And I said, let's not include NBA Live, because we're always talking about NBA Live, right? It's been NBA Live and NBA 2K. That's all we've been talking about now, basically for over a decade, because the last player in the 5-on-5 space that was trying to compete was actually the NBA series, which used to be NBA Shootout. So NBA 09, the inside, and obviously NBA 10, the inside for, which came out for the PSP. But we haven't had another competitor outside of NBA Live and NBA 2K, like a true competitor, for over a decade now.
And it's a real shame. I mean, look at the games that we've been playing and what they brought to the table. It just shows the need for alternatives.
Yeah, and it's been really cool to see people like Nate and Roger, the Live 01 legends, playing games like NBA Shootout in this week's NLSC Top 10, which I thought was excellent. You can check that out on the NLSC YouTube. There is a highlight that was submitted from the Live 01 legends where it's NBA Shootout 2003, and it's Kobe going in for an awesome one-handed jam, and Bill Walton's on the call. It sounds great. Ian Eagle is on the call. It's a great highlight. So I like seeing these non-NBA Live NBA 2K titles. They're fun to revisit, and it's fun to see them in the countdown.
Playing games from the same year like that, when we had that variety of games set in the same season, It's almost like watching games on different networks, isn't it? You get those different commentators, you get that different feel, that different presentation. So it's just different.
Yeah, and Ian Eagle, obviously the voice of NBA Playgrounds, right? So, like, for me, every time I revisit one of the shootout games where he's on commentary, I'm like thinking NBA Playgrounds, because that's what I had visited, most recently, and it's a newer game and whatnot. I love Bill Walton on the call, because he was doing commentary for the shootout series, and then he jumped over and was doing commentary for ESPN NBA 2K.
Yeah.
Right. So he was on commentary there. So I love hearing Bill Walton on the mic, whether it's in real life and on the virtual or on the virtual hardwood.
Such a memorable commentator for us in the 90s, right?
Yeah. And he's overly dramatic, but not to a fault.
Yeah.
Like, I enjoy his exaggerations, his ridiculous comparisons, and everything. He makes the broadcast fun.
He also knows his stuff. He was an incredibly smart player. Like, people look at his stats and think, why is this guy in the Hall of Fame sometimes? That is so wrong. He was a fantastic player. Injuries cut down his NBA career, but at his best, when he was healthy, incredible play. Is one of the best.
He showed how smart of a player he was when he was with the Celtics, because he had lost a lot of his athleticism, a lot of his speed, his legs were gone, etc. But he was such a smart player that he was still able to be super effective on both defense and offense and help that Celtics team to glory, to win an NBA championship and whatnot. Bill Walton is one of the most underrated players, I would say.
Agreed.
Because I don't think he's talked about enough in the great centers conversations.
No, I totally agree. Absolutely. So we obviously always advocate for variety in the space. We'd love to see it again, even if it's just one title as an alternative to NBA 2K. We're not alone in that regard, Derek. Looking at these responses to your question this week, and we'll start out with Trent. Says, Inside Drive for sure. And after playing Inside Drive 2003 and 2004 these past couple of weeks, I would absolutely agree. And once again, even though they weren't releasing on PC back then, seeing what Microsoft is doing these days with releasing some of those first-party games on both Xbox and Windows, I think Inside Drive would be a great candidate.
Yeah, NBA Live 2003 has right stick dribbling, obviously, right stick triple threat. But outside of that, I don't find that it has gameplay advantages or many gameplay advantages over Inside Drive 2003, for example. I think that Inside Drive actually flows a lot better. It flows at a more sim pace. I think that oftentimes it's better animated and whatnot. It's less arcade. And I think that, if they were able to compete back then with, NBA Live during NBA Live's second stage of glory, right? Their next run of games that were incredibly popular and everything. I don't see why, if they kept a lot of those minds on the project and that development team mostly intact, why they couldn't be competing and making absolutely ridiculously awesome basketball games today.
Definitely. And I actually think that over the years, other games would adopt the right stick dribbling. I think that would become standard, just as 2K finally adopted it years after NBA Live did. I think that would become a standard control feature in basketball video games.
Right, because imagine Inside Drive 2003, like those older titles, with right stick dribbling.
Yeah.
With all the other awesome gameplay elements they already have. That would have been excellent.
Next up, we have Khalil Ward, says NBA Shootout, also released in Australia as Total NBA. And hey, what more of a 90s title, Derek, than Total NBA, right? But the NBA Shootout series ran for a while and was quite popular too.
I was spending quite a bit of time last year on NBA Shootout 2004. I even uploaded a gameplay video where I was using the Sonics versus Chris Kamen's Clippers. And they were doing a lot of good with that series. I would say that it's definitely debatable, though, if those, NBA Shootout 2004 and 2003 were actually better than like the late 90s shootouts, because I think that NBA Shootout 98 was an incredibly strong title. And I think that from a gameplay perspective, it can compete with NBA Live 98, which was incredibly well received. And you and I both loved that title. But like I said, with the Shootout series, they ended up becoming the NBA series, like NBA The Life, NBA 08, 09, etc. And now, more than likely, those games would be developed by San Diego Studios, who actually develops the MLB The Show series, which is the number one selling baseball series out there. And they do a fantastic job with that game. So, yeah, I would absolutely love to see them dive back into the basketball 5-on-5 space.
And Playoff Kings also cast a vote for NBA Shootout, says that's where I got my start. Shootout 97 and 98 on PS1 were some of my favorites. And I do have those games. I do have them as total NBA 97 and 98. I got them years later. Didn't play them until probably the last few years when I started collecting them. But yeah, definitely a lot of good stuff in those games. And again, it's such a 90s title. I don't know why they renamed it for the PAL regions, but a very 90s title of total NBA.
Yeah. So Stildo was on the podcast, Stildo33. Obviously, he works on the NBA 2K19 retro season mods. He played a lot of NBA 2K17 and modded that as well. Friend of the show. He's still working on those 2K19 rosters. He told a story about an epic playoff matchup with a friend, and that was on a shootout game. And he has quite the fondness for those 90s shootout games. And I think that what people today need to understand is that these alternative titles like NBA Shootout were sometimes primary for people in their household. I remember there was a really long stretch where I wasn't playing much of NBA Live because I was obsessed with NBA in the Zone 2, right? I put down NBA Live and I'm like, I'm going to jump all over NBA in the Zone 2. I'm going to jump all over the hidden legends. I'm going to put them on a team and play a season. I'm going to use the Pistons through a season, which I did with Grant Hill and Joe Dumars, etc. And I loved that there was the national anthem before the game and how they announced the lineups. And I liked the animations and all of that stuff. It was a completely different experience playing NBA in the Zone instead of NBA Live. So there was a time in my life where an alternative title was absolutely my primary. So I get it.
I mean, NBA Live was popular, but there are a lot of people that grew up playing those other games or preferred them to Live, at least some of the time.
Yeah, no, 100%. And sometimes, and maybe that was his case, maybe Shootout was the only game in his house, right? Maybe he got it as a Christmas present.
That's the one you pick up? Yeah, for sure.
Right, exactly. So he might have a certain fondness and nostalgia specifically for those games for giving him his start.
We have 2 more votes for NBA Inside Drive here. Because Media says NBA Inside Drive, most definitely. It looked great while still being able to play well. And Keys 3-2 says, think it would be Inside Drive because it had the most potential, in his opinion.
Well, I can't disagree with that, right?
Yeah.
I think that Inside Drive 2003 and 2004 are stronger titles overall than Shootout 2003 and 2004, though I do like those titles and whatnot. And we know what happened with the Konami games like NBA in the Zone. They dropped in the Zone, then they went, I believe, over to NBA Starting 5 and whatever, and that was not a hit. It was really raw. They didn't continue with that series. They tried to bring it back with NBA Starting 5, 2005, which you and I played. And while it looked amazing, the gameplay was super troubling for us. A lot of weird animations, a lot of weird on-court happenings, heavy players, heavy animations, all of that stuff. That game wasn't even released in the U.S. You and I had to have it delivered from outside. For me outside the U.S. and you from outside of Australia. But yeah, I think that NBA Inside Drive had such a strong gameplay base. Like he said, it looked good and played good. Like it was both. It's the perfect storm.
Yeah, they got it right. There are some games that do, as you say, do have those impressive graphics and, these are cool features and the menus look great and, it's got ESPN branding. I'm thinking of ESPN NBA Tonight here, in case people don't realize. But when you put it on the floor, we can have fun with it, but it's definitely not on the same level as other games of its vintage.
I agree 100%.
And speaking of NBA Starting 5, that is Popcorn Jones 77's answer. Says, fun AF game.
Here's the thing. Konami, right? What did you associate Konami with for the majority of their run with basketball video games? Fun. It was fun. It was fast-paced fun. Konami is Double Dribble, Double Dribble Playoff Edition also for, Sega Genesis. It's the NBA in the Zone games, which were just, fast paced, loud dunks, good mechanics overall, good presentation. Konami would be incredibly welcome back in the space because if they were making games that they would make them fun.
And before we head over to Discord to get one more response, Railhouse is spoiled for choice, not sure which way to go, has posted a cat gif looking back and forth. Yes, so, yeah.
I think the cat's going, oh.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Someone make a decision, yeah.
And you look at those games, you wish we still had that variety in the space. So, yeah, it's a tough call.
Yeah, definitely. And also, Run and Gun was Konami. I just want to point that out. And how fun is that game? So I was just thinking back to Konami. I'm like, there's actually been a lot of titles that were made by Konami that just give you hours and hours of fun.
But heading over to the Discord now, Wizcard Rush says, I would choose NBA Starting 5. So another vote for Konami's NBA Starting 5. Konami making a basketball is so fascinating, especially during that era. The last game that came out only in Japan is a solid entry and came with a couple of classic teams. A couple of us from the Discord played it through Parsec a few weeks back. It had realistic physics and felt fair to play. I may disagree on the quality of the game, but it is a very interesting game, and I'm very glad to have it in my collection. And yeah, those classic teams, what a huge addition that flew under the radar.
I know, people don't talk about that, right? The fact that game included classic teams and that the rosters were so well done and the graphics look great, like the players look like their real-life counterparts on those classic teams, etc. I don't like the gameplay on that game. However, I'm willing to spend a little bit more time with it to try to get used to it because I have not spent a ton of time with that game. But you'll notice the theme here is they bring up Konami, right? Because, say again, it's Konami style. It's Konami games. Like people associate Konami with fun basketball titles. So it's natural that those people who remember Konami fondly are going to would love to see them come back.
I mean, it's the EAs and the 2Ks of the world that really got the sim right, the sim aspect right in their best games and their best releases. But Konami, as you say, knows how to make fun games, or certainly did back in the day. And yeah, a lot of that hybrid style they had in the Zone series and so forth, that sim arcade hybrid was a lot of fun. Yeah,
it really was. And like I said, I think that a lot of people want a different experience. That's why, NBA Jam became so popular immediately on releases, because it was a different experience than the 5-on-5 sim slog, right? That you had with some of the basketball video games at the time. So they're like, hey, this is faster pace. Hey, this is arcade. I'm not even that big of a fan of basketball and I love playing this, etc. And then you can also have the 5-on-5 arcade type style that differs from that 5-on-5 sim slog if you don't like that. So, you had a lot of those games back at the time. You and I connected on NBA in the Zone, the original one for PlayStation. That game is not sim, Andrew.
No.
That game is not super sim. I mean, you could, dunk it from the free throw line or close to it with, I don't know, Don Reed, right? Like
Chris Mullin.
Right, with Chris Mullin. Actually, you did have a dunk like that. But it was accepted in the space because it doesn't always need to be sim. It doesn't always need to be serious. And it's fun using players that you know in a league that you love in a different fashion. Right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So like when we connected and you were dunking from close to the foul line with Chris Mullin, hey, you know what? For that game, for that experience, it was still fun. So yeah, I think that all different types of gameplay styles can work with the NBA license and that there will be a market for those games.
I agree. And it is something that we are missing in the space with the disappearance of those other companies, those other developers. I mean, we talk about the absence of live, even just having not having that alternative in the sim space, but having those hybrid styles, having the arcade style of NBA Jam and NBA Street, and NBA Playgrounds did kind of try and fill the gap, but we've talked about its deficiencies before. Still very solid games, don't get me wrong. But yeah, we're all for having a choice in the space again. But in the meantime, we do have our collections, Derek.
No, we definitely do. And you know what? I was counting. And I have well over 100 video games, basketball video games, in my collection. And I was thinking that I'm going to need to show that on social media like you did at some point. I've shown my shootout collection. Speaking of non-NBA live NBA 2K games, I have every shootout game and every NBA series, the NBA 09 blah, blah, blah series games. I have all of those from the original all the way up to NBA 10, the inside for the PSP and whatnot. I'm going to have to show my collection.
Oh, absolutely. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I will say, though, fair warning, put aside an afternoon to set it all up and get that photo, and then to put it away again. The putting it away again is the worst part.
Yeah, I know that was a big thing for you, and I know that it took you a while to not only set up the games, but also to, put them all away.
But thank you for those responses. Always great to hear from our listeners, Derek. And it's clear that other people would love to have alternatives in the space, just as we do.
Fingers crossed, right?
That's right.
Maybe someday NBA Live will come back, and then, another company will also return, and then we can have true viable competition in the space. And if that happens, everybody has to up their game.
With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, we thank you for tuning in and invite you to join us again next week, either on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or your podcast app of choice. In the meantime, please connect with us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
You can find me on Twitter at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
I am Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on Twitter. The NLSC is on Twitter and Facebook at the NLSC. Our Instagram is NLSC Basketball. We're on YouTube at youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. And of course, keep it locked to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.